I'm really excited to bring you this next guest. His name is Shawn Harris, and he's running for Congress in Georgia's 14th District against Marjorie Taylor Greene. Shawn is a really interesting guy. He grew up in rural Georgia on a family farm, then went off to serve in the military for 40 years, leaving as a brigadier general. Now he's back in Georgia. He and his wife have a cattle ranch, and he's decided to throw his hat in the political ring. Let's take a listen to what he has to say. Shawn, thank you for joining us on the Post-Industrial Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, hey, man, I appreciate it. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here with you today.
Oh, great. Well, I want to give folks a little bit more information about you and your upbringing. I told them a little bit in the intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm like a typical everyday guy. I was born in Southwest Georgia on a dirt road, Blakely, Georgia. Was raised on a farm. We actually raised cattle, peanuts, soybeans, and those type things. And then after high school, back in 1984 timeframe, I actually joined the United States Marine Corps, enlisted, graduated from Paris Island, went on through all the steps like everybody else, and then got out and decided to go to college there at Tuskegee University, and found out very quickly that the money I had saved up in the Marine Corps wasn't enough to cover the bills. So Army ROTC gave me some money, and I went through that particular program and graduated as a second lieutenant. Went to what is now Fort Moore. Back then it was called Fort Benning as a second lieutenant, and then just followed my career on like everybody else. I did time in the National Guard. I did time on active duty. And so I have a very good understanding of when we talk to our veterans on all sides of the house, where we stand. But ultimately, my last assignment was there in Israel, where I was a senior defense official. But I'm willing to talk about any of those things with you today.
It's interesting for you to say that I'm just a regular guy. I don't know many regular guys that go from being enlisted in the Marines to becoming a brigadier general in the Army, go on to do work in Israel, having served in the military for 40 years. You saw combat in Afghanistan. Those don't sound to me like regular guy bona fides, but okay, I understand you're modest. Talking about your military service, you served in Afghanistan. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan as well. We were just talking off camera about that you were in Kapisa province, and that's an area that probably folks aren't too familiar with. Tell people a little bit about what it was like to serve in Afghanistan there.
Well, I tell you, as you know, Afghanistan was a tough place. I was there doing the surge 2007, 2008. Originally, my team, we were trained to go in and mentor and train the Afghanistan Army. Upon hitting the ground, the mission was changed, and we were the first ones to start training up the police. And I was selected to train the police in the Kapisa province. And for 12, 13 months, whatever it was, we did that every day. But what I would tell you, it wasn't just like training police saying, look, stop, and I'm gonna give you a ticket. We didn't do that. When we were training the police there in Afghanistan, it was nothing more than actually training like regular soldiers. Except these guys were from the province. They would go home every day. But at the end of the day, we were in combat pretty much every day. But I'm proud to say that everybody that I took into Afghanistan with me, we brought everybody back home. And still today, after all these many years later, we're dealing with a lot of things when it comes to suicide. All 15 of us are actually still living and being productive. So that's what we're trying to do. Just like we did a good job in Afghanistan, we're still trying to do a good job today, many years after taking the uniform off.
Well, again, I have to speak to your modesty. You talk about Kapisa province and what you were doing there, training the police. Just to give folks a little bit of context, I will tell them it is a deadly, mountainous, Taliban boogeyman riddled province of Afghanistan that gave numerous fighting forces over the years a lot of trouble. So having served there surely proves your bona fides.
Yes, sir.
Sure you did see some combat there, right?
Most definitely. We saw combat every day. And every day when we would come out of our forward operating base, we call a FOB, in the Tecumseh Valley, we would pass by the old Russian tanks. So when you start talking about other countries that had fought there before us, every day we would pass by their tanks that they left there in 1979 time frame. And so it was a reminder that this is not the first time that somebody was fighting in Afghanistan. And we would see people way up in the mountains that could tie their ancestry all the way back to Alexander the Great. So this is a place that's been fighting for a long time. The people are tough. And you know, what I always tell people about my time in Afghanistan, it was tough, but that's what leaders have to do, especially when you put the uniform on. We're not going on vacation, and we do our mission. We come on home, and as veterans we're very humble about what we did, and usually we don't talk about it too much. So when I speak about my time in the military, I always focus on all the outstanding soldiers and Marines and everybody else that were with me, because I'm a firm believer this is a team sport, and I wouldn't have never got to the rank that I was at if I didn't have strong senior NCOs that I listened to. And that's kind of how I'm looking at as I move into this Congress thing, to be a team player and listen to people around me, but specifically listen to the people here in Northwest Georgia as their representative.
Well, that experience working with a team and under duress is surely going to serve you well, and is serving you well as you embark on your political career. What are the major differences you've seen from your 40-year military career? Just for a second, I want to make sure everybody knows this. 20 years is the year at which 20 years of service is when you can retire and get a pension. You chose to serve for 40 years, twice the amount of time. That's remarkable. I don't know if I've ever interviewed anyone who has served for 40 years in the military. And to look like you did. When did you sign up? When you were 6?
Well, I tell you, no, I wasn't 6. I was 17. But what I will say this is, you know, when 9/11 hit, the game changed. And you know, it got there to a point that we were busy, and the American people were dependent on us. We were fighting 2 wars, and it wasn't time to get out, or it wasn't the right time to get out. And then as the deployments kept coming and the assignments kept coming, to be honest with you, I actually lost track of time. It wasn't until I was retiring when the young soldier said, "Hey, sir, let's add this thing up. This thing is basically 40 years. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because, you know, in the military, many times we doing 2- and 3-year assignments at a time. Or if you're going into a combat zone, it's usually a year or so, depending on what branch of service. So that's how I had been living my life, of assignment to assignment to assignment, and not looking at the whole long game. So, you know, I'm proud of my service. 40 years is a long time. Now I'm out. My back can tell me that I did 40 years. It hurts every day. But again, I'm proud that I did it. I wouldn't change one thing about it. I mean, even the worst days, I'm proud I had the opportunity, because there's nothing better than our country. And we need to continue to support our troops and make sure that we're encouraging young people to join on their own and go out and take care of the business that the American people want us to do.
So you left the military. You are currently have your own cattle ranch now in northern Georgia, and are fighting to win an election in the fighting 14th district against Marjorie Taylor Greene. What is that transition like, starting with going from the military to the political arena?
Well, I tell you, it's totally 2 different worlds, but a lot of the leadership traits cross over. And what I mean by that is, you know, like you said, we got out, my wife and I, and we came here to Northwest Georgia, bought our cattle farm, and basically started from nothing. So we've been putting up a lot of fence and all those kind of things, and got cattle now. Everything's going great. But in that very beginning, it was federal veterans that were actually helping me put all the fencing up. And they said, "Hey, Shawn, you still got a little bit too much energy, man. You you don't know how to slow down." And you know, when you transition out of the military, it can get a little tough. And coming back out of Israel, carrying 2 and 3 phones, talking to senior leaders all the time, talking to politicians all the time, or talking to any and everybody what's really going on in Israel. to come back here to the farm and just be working with cattle. Okay, that was pretty slow. So these two veterans actually asked me to run for Congress, or told me that I should run for Congress, and they wanted me to actually run against Marjorie Taylor Greene in the primary. And when they said that, I said, hey, you know, I'm not a Republican. And they said, okay, we still want to support you. And that's when I knew then that potentially we had something. And I picked up the phone and called the Democratic Party up there in Atlanta, and we walked through it and said, yep, we're going to do it. And now we're in the fight of our lives. And when I say we're in the fight of our lives, is not me, it's in the fight of our lives for the people here in Northwest Georgia, because as you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene has been up there for 3.5 years. I would never say anything negative about her. I let her record speak for itself, and the record is very clear. 3.5 years, she has not passed not one bill. She has not did anything that is benefiting the people here in Northwest Georgia. And as a representative of Northwest Georgia, that's where her focus should be. She does not represent the entire United States, and she does not represent Georgia. And when people talk to us and say where you live, the first thing they say, oh my goodness, you're from that area where Marjorie Taylor Greene is from. That's embarrassing. And at the end of the day, when I win this election, nobody in Northwest Georgia will ever be embarrassed again. And they'll know that I have my sleeves rolled up and working to bring back things, to make things better for everybody that lives here.
I read a great interview with you in Newsweek recently about your strategy for taking on Marjorie Taylor Greene. And you mentioned, and this is a great quote, that she's actually one of your greatest assets in this race. What do you mean by that?
Yes, that is something that we picked up from the military, or I picked up from the military. Sometimes Marjorie Taylor Greene is not my enemy. However, I am running against Marjorie Taylor Greene. And when I say she is my greatest asset, Marjorie Taylor Greene does something every day that will aid me. So, other words, Shawn Harris does not have to say something about Marjorie Taylor Greene, what she's doing or what she's not doing. Every day she basically goes on social media and she does something incredible that will help me show the difference between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Shawn Harris to the people here in Northwest Georgia, the voters. Give you a prime example. As you said, I spent those years in the military. I support Ukraine. I support what our country is doing, because the United States, we are the most powerful country in the world, and we lead the world through NATO and other things that we're doing. Marjorie Taylor Greene says, no, we should pull back. We should not want to be a leader of the world, and we should not support Ukraine. On top of that, I know Putin is a thug. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. He's highly trained as being a KGB. Marjorie Taylor Greene takes exactly what Putin puts out, and that's what comes out of her mouth. So she doesn't understand our role as the United States, but she also don't understand her role as a representative for all the farmers, veterans, and everybody else that lives here in the 14th. One of the things I just want to point out to you is inside of the 14th is over 40,000 plus veterans that actually live here in the rural community. I've never actually ever seen Marjorie Taylor Greene ever take the time to talk about what is she doing for veterans? What is she doing for farmers? She constantly blocks the farm bill. The farm bill is what keeps our farmers up and going during tough times. It also has a SNAP program in it that feeds our unfortunate kids. You know, here in our part of Georgia is beautiful. The mountains are great, but we're not the richest part of Georgia. And we have a significant amount of kids that are dependent on the SNAP program to actually have something to eat all the time. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has consistently voted no against that. And that's the piece that kind of blows my mind, is how can she, if she represents the people here, how can she vote no on all those things? And with the amount of veterans that we have and the amount of young people that are joining the military, how can you vote no when it comes to supporting our soldiers that are actually in uniform today, and then also supporting our soldiers and the Airmen and Marines that have already served? So that's where I'm at with Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's why I say she's my greatest asset, and she will continue to be my greatest asset. I just want to say on your show, Marjorie Taylor Greene is refusing to debate me. I don't know why. I'm asking
Well,
her. I'm
based on how you're talking, I
come on out and debate me. Let's stop playing around. It's not about what's happening up in DC or in New York or California. It's about what's happening right here in Northwest Georgia in the rural community. Come on home. Stop following Donald Trump around wherever he's going to be at his rallies and come back here and debate me. We can do it anywhere. Do it in my front yard. We can do it in Rome in her front yard. We can do it any way she want to do it. I'm calling her out. Let's do the debate. Everybody else is doing debates. Stop avoiding me.
Well, I understand why she would be intimidated with debating you. You are very good at laying down facts, and she's very good at laying down fear. Which is
I'm the nicest general you ever going to meet.
Yeah, I've met a few that are definitely a lot tougher to deal with in a conversation. That's for sure. I've interviewed Petraeus, so I know general tricks.
Oh yeah, I know general Petraeus also.
More amenable. Yeah, you have to at that level. I understand it. Georgia strikes me as a really interesting state in that you have two Democratic U.S. senators,
yes,
but a very popular, some would consider moderate governor in Brian Kemp. How do you thread the needle as a Democrat in trying to attract those Republicans? I know you've spoken about how Republican had encouraged you to run against her in the primary, and then you informed them that you're a Democrat, and they still said they would support you. But how do you thread the needle of those voters who, say, voted for a Warnock or an Ossoff and also a Brian Kemp? How do you attract those voters?
Well, I tell you, that's a great question. Here in Georgia, we have very, very intelligent voters. And what I mean by that, you know, most people think people vote party lines. Many voters here in Northwest Georgia actually study the individual. And if it makes sense for them, they will actually vote for a Democrat. And on that same ticket, they'll vote for a Republican. And that's what happened during this last election. That's how we ended up getting two senators that are Democrat. And we actually kept a governor that's a Republican, even with Donald Trump saying whatever he said about Kim. Okay. How do I make that happen here inside of the district? People, I'm going to every zip code in our district. I'm going to places that when I get there, they say, Shawn, what are you doing here? Nobody has ever came here, Democrat or Republican. And I say to them, you're right, but that's okay. You mean something to me, and I want to represent you. So that's how I'm breaking through all of those things and talking to every demographic, talking to every zip code to ensure that they understand if they're cast my vote for Shawn Harris, regardless if I'm a Democrat, Republican, or independent, Shawn Harris, the person, will wake up in the morning thinking about them. And when I make my decisions, it will be based off what is best for them. And then the last thing I'll say on that is this. I tell them all the time, one of the greatest assets that a leader can have is not the ability to talk, is what the good Lord gave you. He gave you 2 ears, the ability to listen. And many a times when I go out to these different communities, they say to me, Marjorie Taylor Greene has never been here after 3.5 years. When Marjorie Taylor Greene comes somewhere, she has her talking points. When we ask questions of Marjorie Taylor Greene, her campaign team gives us a question and she already knows the answer. When I go, I just step out of my truck and I say, hi, my name is Shawn Harris and I want to be your representative. And then we have a conversation, but I spend most of the time listening to make sure I understand what is the issue in their particular area. And I just give you one quick example. It is many places or several counties here in Northwest Georgia in our district that don't even have a hospital. This is not a third world. We should not have a healthcare desert. But at the same time, we have other counties that have an incredible hospital system. So I got to work and make sure that we correct that. And that's something Marjorie Taylor Greene hadn't touched at all when it comes to our healthcare system.
I'm glad you brought up rural healthcare. This is a topic that we cover closely at Postindustrial because the lack thereof is a growing problem in our coverage area. We cover the Rust Belt and Appalachia and these other post-industrial communities around the country. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of these places that are losing their access to quality healthcare that when a tragedy befalls them, they're forced to take it's either an hour-long car ride or ambulance ride to the nearest hospital.
Yeah,
that's not a sustainable model for providing quality healthcare to people throughout the country, and that's something that I'm glad that you're addressing. There's something else I wanted to ask you about. Tragedy recently befell Georgia with another unfortunate school shooting. Again, we're hearing initial reports about the use of an assault-style weapon in this shooting. A 14-year-old boy killed 2 teens and 2 teachers at a school in Georgia. What is your stand on gun control as it pertains to assault weapons?
Well, I would tell you, one of you asked me earlier, what makes me a little bit different from some of the other Democrats out there? One, I do carry. However, I'm a responsible gun owner. That means everything is locked up. We're going to make sure that we follow all the right procedures. And I'll just say this because I spend a significant amount of my time. We mentioned it. I train other militaries how to shoot war type weapons, AK-47s and AR-15s. That particular weapon should never be left unlocked, that anyone can actually have access to it. That weapon is designed to do exactly, if that's the weapon the young man had yesterday, it is designed to do exactly what it's supposed to do. I don't have all the details that actually happened up there yesterday. I do know the young man is 14 years old, if I remember correct. I do know that it had been a situation the year before when he lived in a different county that somebody put something on a chat that potentially they're going to shoot up a building. What I will just say is this. We have to do something. I'm not going to say I have the answer today, but what I will say, when I get to Washington, D.C., I'm going to be an adult in the room and not pointing fingers at back and forth and just talking. I want to sit down with responsible leaders, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, and say, what can we craft that we can actually agree upon to make sure that these things are not happening? I'm not the guy that's trying to come out and take everybody's guns. That is not Shawn Harris. However, at the end of the day, I think all of us here in Georgia yesterday, all of us, when it first came up on CNN and Fox as breaking news and said it had been a shooting in Georgia, that was it. They didn't say what part of Georgia or whatever. The first thing that clicked in my mind yesterday when I was driving to Chattanooga, Tennessee was, my goodness, please don't let this be a school where some of my grandkids go to school. And I think everybody had that sinking feeling, regardless of where you stand on gun control, of where does this happen and how did it happen? And then when they actually said it was Northeast Georgia, and then they went on and said it was Barrow County, you realized, oh my goodness, I am so sorry for that community. The last thing I would say on it, sir, that gets back to mental health. We will find out the individual kid, what was his mental health, what was going on in the house. But in addition to that, you spent time in Afghanistan. I spent time in Afghanistan. When you go through any of those type things, you're going to have a second and third order effect. That means we need to make sure that we have systems in place for all of those 2,000 kids, educators, the whole 9 yards, that entire community to have access to mental health, because not only will they be affected today, some of this mental health issues may manifest itself years from now. So we need to make sure that after all the highlights and everybody stops talking about this school in Northeast Georgia, that we have the wraparound programs there to support them. And when I talk about gun control and all of these kind of things, that's the other piece that I'm talking about, is what support do they have on the front end? What support do they have during? And then what support do they have afterwards? I tell you, I was very pleased to hear that the teachers had just got a system. I don't remember the name of the system, but they had just got a name of a system 1 week prior that they could push a button, and that button alone made the superintendent, made the school leadership and the police aware that it was a problem in the school. I think that was outstanding, and good Lord bless them that they got that system 1 week before this incident happened. But it's still a lot of unknowns in this particular situation, and we'll let it play out. But when I get to DC, I'm going to work with other leaders across the board to see how can we get to yes, because, you know, I saw it last night. Thoughts and prayers are outstanding, but thoughts and prayers are not going to fix this. This is uniquely a United States problem. This is not happening anywhere else in the world. Everybody else in the world is dealing with terrorists. This is a domestic terrorist situation that we got to get our hands around. And our kids should not go to school in the morning, or you shouldn't take your kids to school or send your kids to school and not even remotely think they may not come back home that afternoon. So we got to do something and work hard.
That doing something, would that include a national gun registry, a greater accountability for these weapons? You know, there was recently an incident in Michigan of a school shooting that took place in 2022 where the parents were held criminally liable and are now both have been imprisoned for not taking the necessary precautions that you mentioned about locking up their weapon, making sure that their son didn't have access to it. In fact, they encouraged it, even though the school had that very same day, earlier in the day, had said that their son was exhibiting disturbing behavior and that should be taken home, and they refused to take him home. Later that day, he killed a number of teachers and students. Would you support that kind of legislation that would create greater accountability for parents in these types of situations?
100%. And the reason why I say that is, like I mentioned earlier, all of my weapons are locked up. Every last one of them. A weapon is not going to do anything unless the individual decides to do something with it. And if the parent has weapons in their house, which is their right, they should make sure that they are locked up and others cannot get to them. Just because you take your son or your daughter out hunting doesn't mean that they still have access to the weapon when they come back home. So that simply means we have to be responsible. And if we're not going to be responsible, then we need to be held accountable. And in this particular situation here, like you talked about up in Michigan, if it finds out that the family was not responsible with that weapon, then that family needs to be held accountable, especially because somebody went to their house 1 year earlier and made the parents aware that, hey, based on these computer systems that we're talking on right now, it was traced back to their address. So even though the kid said he had absolutely nothing to do with it, you and I and others that know how these computers work, it is not going to say the neighbor's house next door. It will tell you exactly where it came from, even if you're sitting at a Starbucks. So at the end of the day, the parents are going to have to answer for this, but I will hold there and let all the facts come out. But I think here in the next few weeks and days, we'll learn more about how did we get to this particular day. But like they said last night, I saw in the report, it would seem to be, it was a lot of heroes in that school that day, kids, students, and also the security. I'm not sure what they call them. I call them security guards, but they're more than security guards. But those 2 or 3 individuals, they actually approached that kid with pistols. And if he's carrying the platform that I'm led to believe that he was carrying, he actually had the advantage, but they approached him and he decided to surrender. So that's good. Hopefully we can learn a lot from the young man that's actually going to prison, and address how can we make things better.
The issue of gun.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, well, you're quite welcome. The issue of guns is a contentious one in America, has been for decades now. And my question is, how do you cut through the pro-gun messaging? And I'll just go as far to call it propaganda that comes out of the NRA and out of lawmakers like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are adamantly defending the Second Amendment at all costs, even as it pertains to our children and their well-being in schools and places where they're supposed to stay safe. How do you cut through all of that noise to try to get this message out? And I know that you had this experience even going back to Afghanistan, because the Taliban are really good at their propaganda too, and convincing people of things that are not true. How are you going to cut through that noise?
The way we cut through the noise is, like I mentioned earlier, we have to have adults in Washington, D.C. that says, okay, I support the Second Amendment or I don't. I personally support the Second Amendment. What I don't support is actually kids getting killed at school. So based on that, putting the right leaders in the room to have a civil discussion, because I think every last one of us, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, would say that none of us wake up in the morning and want anybody's kids to be killed at school. And if we can work off that premise, we should be able to find some level of legislation that we can all agree upon to move forward. Right now, what the NRA and others want us to do, they want us to be arguing and pointing fingers at each other and never actually sitting down and actually trying to figure out where are the area that we agree. And that's where I'm at today. As I travel around the district, I know, like you asked me today, I know people are going to ask me, Shawn, where you stand on it. I'm not going to shy away from where I stand, but I'm also not the guy that's saying I'm coming to your house trying to take your weapons. But I'm also the guy that's saying, look, do you want to receive the phone call that your child has been killed today?
Mm-hmm.
And I think any and everybody would take a step and say, oh boy, you're right there. That's not trying to scare anybody. That is the facts. Yesterday in Northeast Georgia, somebody received a phone call. Two parents received a phone call and said their 14-year-old son was killed. Two more people actually received a phone call and said either their husband, the football coach, and the teacher that I think was 53 years old were killed today. Nowhere else in the world is those phone calls happening. And we need to figure out, how do we get to yes to stop this? And that's where I'm at. Right now, sitting here talking to you from my house, do I have all the answers? No. We will bring in experts from both sides of the house. I don't mind if the NRA is sitting in the damn room. Okay, guess what? I didn't sit in a cave with damn Taliban. I did. And we still got the yes. So, and we had a whole bunch of guns in that cave with us, but we definitely got the yes. So I just say that I want to make sure that we as leaders in the greatest country on walking the face of earth can protect our kids so that this never happens again. But right now, when we go back to school, just like Friday Night Lights and all of that, I think we all kind of know that we're going to have a shootout at some school somewhere in America. And my understanding, that school there in Northeast Georgia had really just started school less than a month ago. I mean, they really still getting to know everybody and going to their first couple of football games. And here we are. The school year has basically already been destroyed because they're going to carry this for a long time.
Well, Shawn, I really appreciate you and your aspiration to be one of the adults on Capitol Hill. Lord knows we need more adults up there. And I really appreciate you coming to talk to us about this and other important issues that you're running on in your campaign against Marjorie Taylor Greene. I wish you the best of luck, and thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and you have a great day. I look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
After your election, absolutely.
After election, we're going to win this thing. And I tell you, I'll just say this. If we don't win, I'm going to still be a cattle farmer, but I'm not just going to sit out here on this farm and do absolutely nothing, because my fellow veterans were right. I still got too much energy, and there's still too many things going on in this world for me just to raise cattle every day. So I look forward to talk to you, win, lose, or draw. and we're going to continue to try to make things better for everybody here in the United States.
Sounds great. Thanks, Shawn.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Have a good day, brother.
I want to thank Shawn for being on the Postindustrial podcast, and I want to thank you for checking us out as well. Be sure to go to postindustrial.com and sign up for our free newsletter. Thanks.